Oops. Sorry, just a second. I'm trying to get the chronometer here. Okay. Panel's ready? In a world where minorities suffer and people with neurodivergencies suffer prejudice every day, we think banalizing them every day into thinking that these conditions are normalized should not be relevant. Proud to propose this debate. A couple things I'll bring here. First, on the rise of self-diagnosis and how they banalize neurodivergent conditions. But second, arguments into self-diagnosis, which harms everyone, those who self-diagnose and those who are actually divergent people. But I actually want to bring some characterizations into our framing. In both sides of the house, we think there's a rise of mental health awareness that doesn't come necessarily from their side of the house. We think there are some kind of things, just like the pandemic, for example, which made people think more about mental health conditions and made them talk more about it. But I also think that this comes from public policies and a world in which minorities are being a little bit more represented, in which we have more laws and more rights for these communities, Black communities, minorities in general. And this also means that neurodivergent people have been a little bit more included in the society. So I think having a social rise of mental health is something that happens in both sides of the house. But I also want to characterize how does this incentive to self-diagnose happens in the first place. I think that the reason why in the first place we have this diagnosis thing happening is because of social media and the rise of people talking about this in social media. This looks like a couple of scenarios. The first scenario is doctors who want to rise in their professional careers, go to social media as a way to have more professionalism and more people seeing them as relevant. But this is not the most important thing. I think the most important thing is people who want views, who want likes and profit out of social media and do these very crazy videos which not necessarily are true and go on the social media and say, for example, oh, if you go through this situation when you're in school, if you take a bad test and you're just not focusing so much, maybe you have ADHD, and people start feeling that situation and then they start seeing that, oh, but I relate to this symptom and therefore I might actually have ADHD. And this kind of situations in which makes them go through this thing. But I also think that fake news and other things make disincentive to happen in the first place. But our counterfactual is very simple. We have two scenarios. The first scenario is the one in which people will look for a doctor to have their diagnosis. And the second scenario is the one in which they just accept that they have symptoms, but they not necessarily have the condition. So they live with the symptoms, but they don't say, yes, okay, I have ADHD. I decided that by myself because I relate to many of the symptoms that happen. This is what happens in their side of the house, and this leads me to our first argument: how the rise of the self-diagnosis banalizes neurodivergent conditions. I have two layers on this argument that I want to bring to you. The first layer is into characterization. Let's characterize how do people do this diagnosis. I think the main reason why, and this is really important, is that people want to justify their actions on the symptoms that they see on the internet. So when I self-diagnose myself with ADHD, for example, is because I see on social media that those who go bad on tests or sometimes cannot finish a test on the set time in school, they usually are people with ADHD, which need better conditions and need better treatment. I think these people justify their actions in saying that, for example, I wasn't that good on the test because I have ADHD, simply because I saw this social media videos or because I self-diagnosed myself with that. So I think not only for school, but in other scenarios, people justify these actions that others who actually have this situation also have. But this is a very important thing. And the reason why I'm explaining this to you, panel, is that further abroad, I will explain how this impacts on people simply not improving themselves when they have the opportunity to, since they don't necessarily have this condition in the first place. But I also think that people diagnose themselves due to social media and all this framing that I already brought to you. And I think there's a third reason to why they do that also, that is that they believe that they actually have this condition. Not necessarily through social media, but sometimes even seeing your friends who might actually have, or just simply self-diagnose themselves, they will also have the symptoms, and then you will think that, okay, if they have it, I might have it as well, the same symptoms, so I actually start believing that I have, and that's why I go there and say that I have it. But second layer of analysis is how does having a neurodivergent looks like. I think those who actually have these conditions, they look like people who need special attention, people who sometimes go to school and have someone who's monitoring them at the same time. They need some different resources to adapt to the systems that usually people without these conditions don't need. And they also need a specific situation. Sometimes this means medicine. Sometimes this needs treatment to maybe mitigate, no thank you, to maybe mitigate the symptoms. Second layer of analysis on mechanism. Why does the banalization leads to people, why does in their side of the house, we banalize and this leads to people feeling unhappier? I think there are two main things here that I want to bring. The first is that the more common that some condition is, the less resources someone needs to spend on that. Which means the reason why neurodivergence exists in the first place, I believe, is that because we see a different pattern on the way these people act that is very specific and very well developed. But the thing is, the more everyone says that, for example, I have ADHD, or the more people we see on this on school, on our environment, who say they are autistic or dyslexic, the more we're related to that condition. So I think in a scenario in which everyone starts saying that they have ADHD, the probability for you to start believing that not everyone has, or that this doesn't deserve so much treatment because if everyone has, this is more or less normalized. I think that in their side of the house, we are talking about people not taking seriously those who actually have. This looks like panel, for example. You're having ADHD and your school sometimes just saying that you don't actually need extra time because more people in your classroom also have ADHD. So this looks like the student who actually has it, no thank you, suffering because they don't have the resources they actually needed to have a better life in the first place. But why doesn't this condition happen? Why does this banalization doesn't happen in our side of the house? Then I'll take your POI. I think that those who are diagnosed were actually diagnosed in our side of the house, and this is the main difference and comparative you should take into action. In their side of the house, you might say that you have ADHD, that you might be autistic, and this will be enough for others maybe to say, okay, you are, or not enough. It's not really up to the debate. But the thing is, only in our side of the house, when you say that you have a condition without this rise, I think people will actually believe you have this condition. This means that first of all, people will respect you more about it because they know that what you're suffering on, the consequences of that, and all this prejudice that has been through the lifetime is more relevant and more significant to the way you act. But second of all, I think the resources for these people are more available, and that's basically my second argument on how we have better diagnosis and less harm in our side of the house for the diagnosed ones. But yes, I'll take a POI then.
So even people that self-diagnose still want support and resources. They ask for them, and doesn't that make resources more available when there's more demand? People who actually
I don't think so. Thank you so much for your POI. There are two main reasons why I don't think that's true, and I'll go through that to our arguments. But just to say, I think the higher demand on the medical care system, the more expensive they are. So I think if those who, for example, want this treatment, they won't have access in their side of the house, even those who might need it because they actually have this diagnosis. But then second argument on self-diagnosis and how they harm everyone involved. There are two main stakeholders for this argument and debate. The first one is those who actually have it, and the second one is those who diagnose themselves but don't necessarily have it. And the thing is that when those who don't have it suffer two consequences. If they access resources of treatment, which you can easily access, for example, having a neighbor who has Venvans, for example, a medicine for ADHD and dyslexia, and because their brother simply doesn't take the medicine, you can take it. It's easy and accessible. This also looks like if they don't have access to this, they still use it as a justification for their actions instead of improving themselves. This is an impact for their side of the house because those who don't have it, for example, if I go bad on the task, I say I have ADHD and I don't actually, this also means that instead of improving my grades, I will just justify myself and keep being trapped inside this idea that, okay, I just am sick. I just am diagnosed. I don't necessarily have a way to improve. My other speaker will develop on the people neurodivergent. Thank you. Propose.
I want to thank that speaker for their fine remarks, and I invite the first opposition speaker to open the debate for their speaker.
This is yours.
And I didn't ask this before, but everyone's okay being recorded.
Yeah, I asked them. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All good? Panel, I'm going to do 3 things in this speech. First, I'm going to go over the op stance, then refute the majority of the claims we get from their side, and then forward 2 contentions from our own bench. The first will be on destigmatization, and the second on accessibility of care. Firstly then, on the stance. The first thing that we want to note is that the term the rise of self-diagnoses have not replaced professional medical diagnoses in any way. We think that both have risen together in tandem. As an intuition, there are probably more mental health diagnoses now in 2025 than ever before, so we support a rise in both. On to refutation then. Their very first claim is a rise in this kind of awareness on both sides of the house, and that means that we get more destigmatization either way. We would claim the opposite, that a greater amount of discussion of self-diagnosis on our side is a major contributor to the kinds of destigmatization that we care about. So it's not exactly the same amount of increasing in awareness on both sides of the house. Rather, perhaps there is some degree of baseline liberalization in either world, but we would claim on our side that there's significantly more as a result of greater discussions of self-diagnoses. Their second claim is that people use these diagnoses and are likely to use these diagnoses as an excuse to justify laziness. But let's just gut check this, right? There is still a lot of stigma, even if it is improved on our side, against things like having autism and having ADHD. People are very unlikely to say that, the reason why I did bad on this test is because I have autism, right? Clearly, even though that increases, that is better on our side of the house, there's still a baseline level of stigma. Therefore, our counterclaim is going to be that there is a balance, that normalization on our side means that more people are able to say, I identify with ADHD or the symptoms that are presented, but it's not going to be used willy-nilly as an excuse because of bad test performance or something as similar to that. First argument then on destigmatization. Why do people on their side of the house not access diagnoses even when they have these kinds of neurodivergence? The first thing to note is that there is a wide range of symptoms. Perhaps in society we have a caricature of what an autistic person looks like, or who someone with OCD is. Someone who might be extremely talented in one area but not so good in other areas. Someone who washes their hands 30 times a day. Those are stereotypes that we have. But most people have far more subtle and different symptoms than what we know in society. So for example, some autistic people are sensitive to bright lights or to large crowds. Some people in OCD like things very organized. And those are symptoms we might not traditionally recognize as belonging to those kinds of neurodivergence and therefore don't get recognized on their side of the house. The second reason why people don't get diagnoses is still because of stigma on their side. I think that in society, there's an intrinsic pressure to act normal, to fit in with other people, meaning many people don't even wonder in the first place on their side whether or not they might be neurodivergent. Even if they do have suspicions, oftentimes they don't explore it. There are people in their family that discourage them from wanting to go to a doctor. They're worried about how their friends are going to judge them if they think that they have ADHD. The implication of this is that on their side of the house, the alternative is not that people will go to the doctor and seek help for whatever kinds of treatments they want. The alternative is that on their side of the house, many people who are neurodivergent, who need aids, who would benefit from accommodations, never seek those out in the very first place and don't get diagnosed. Why is this massively harmful? The first reason is just because you get a lack of care, right? People don't get treated. For those who have sensitivity to lights, for example, they might be told to get over it, that they're being too sensitive, and that creates a sense of shame within them. They don't ever realize that they need accommodations or they would benefit from that, or that taking medications might make a lot of their problems go away. The second reason why this is harmful is because there's just a sense of frustration, right? In a world that prioritizes the ability to fit in, I think it can be incredibly isolating to have experiences that other people don't identify with. It can be quite a scary experience to have certain kinds of anxiety, for example, and you feel like other people don't understand you. Why is there greater destigmatization on our side? The first reason is just because you have more knowledge and more discussion about this. I think that this trend in self-diagnosis has inspired more discussion on neurodivergence. So you're now more likely to own up to your condition. You have people who go and self-diagnose and say that, I have ADHD or something. And this means that there are more people around you who discuss your symptoms. There are conversations between classmates about their accommodations and what kinds of access they can get from their counselors. The second reason why there's greater destigmatization is because you just have greater self-acceptance. I think that you have more normalization in society, and this is seen as more acceptable. So taking their own example, if so many people in my class have ADHD, maybe there's a reason why I'm not able to focus other than traditionally being told that I'm lazy or I'm not good enough at school. The strategic implication of this is that regardless of whether or not the self-diagnosis is successful or it is correct, I think there are broad social benefits of destigmatization that worked in our favor. The impact of this argument is threefold. The first, more simply, is that more people seek help. I think this is incredibly important. For people who have severe symptoms, they're more likely to go get doctor diagnoses and get meds. In some cases, people will also give themselves accommodations. So for example, if you have ADHD and you know that it might take more time for you to do things, you might wake up earlier so you're not late to school. So like for example, like in school, like you might like start assignments earlier because you know they'll take longer to complete them. The second impact is that people who have already been diagnosed, which like flips their impacts, will be less stigmatized. It's seen as more normal in society. Lastly, you get more tolerance from people who are neurotypical. So if you're a teacher and your student says that they have neurodivergence, you're more likely to give them accommodations. In a workplace, you're more likely to treat people with empathy. Those are all incredibly important impacts on our side. Before I move on, I'll take that point.
If a lot of people need accommodations, there's no reason to create special environments where we need to actually treat them as special people.
What do you mean like you're treating people as special people? Like I think that on our side of the house, people are more likely to realize that they need accommodations in the very first place. And I'll respond to further refutation in the second argument. Secondly then, on accessibility of care. Why are self-diagnoses likely to be accurate? And this flips the vast majority of their case. The first reason is that the rise means that there's just more information available then. You have a more complete vocabulary as like online, for example, to describe your experiences. There are more sources that tell you how to diagnose yourself. There are more trackers to help determine whether or not you are actually neurodivergent. I think there are more resources on their side of the house instead of like pseudo-fraudulent doctors on TikTok telling you whether or not you have ADHD. But secondly, you're more likely to do your own research as well. Perhaps your initial exposure to the idea of ADHD does come from people on social media who might not have all the information. But if you actually think that you're neurodivergent, if you think that you have ADHD, you're obviously going to explore. You're going to do your own research. You're going to maybe read into this. You're going to go to more reputable sources and determine whether or not you actually are neurodivergent. So we think that even if your initial exposure is not the most positive, you're going to end up with all the information that you need. The last reason why self-diagnoses are likely to be accurate is because I think there are just a lot of neurodivergent people or neurotypical people who have similar experiences and symptoms. Notably, even if you are neurotypical and you have like attention issues, for example, and you think mistakenly that you have ADHD, I think it can still be good that you are self-diagnosing because you're more likely to seek help. There are perhaps medications you can take to help fix your attention issues, even if you don't meet the bar for ADHD, and I think that can still be massively beneficial. And the strategic implication is that a lot of what they say about like people like using this like badly or like misusing this term falls out of this round. Given this then, why are self-diagnoses likely to lead to better care? The first reason is you get an increase in services rather than like zero-sum services on their side of the house. Because when more people want to seek help, this creates a greater demand for things like clinics, for drugs, for psychiatrists. This likely means that more services are going to open up because there's more of a market for it. So in schools, you have more people demanding counselors. At work, you have more people in human resources. Secondly, we think that this is likely to lead to more people sharing like personal ways to manage kinds of neurodivergence. So these are people who have ADHD who share links to spreadsheets that they have for like to-do lists. These are people who have autism sharing like stimming services that they find to be incredibly helpful. We think that overall, more people are able to help manage and access accommodations and better qualities of accommodations for these kinds of neurodivergence, and we think that is the greatest impact in this round. Thank you so much.
Proposition to continue the debate for their side. You're here.
Okay. Everyone can hear me clearly if I speak slow? Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, during my speech I'll do 2 things. First, I'll deal with their stigmatization argument by showing how it's only good for you to be diagnosed if it's actually accurately and done by a professional. But second, I will show you an argument to show how self-diagnosis lead to harmness to everyone involved, both them that self-diagnose and both those that actually have this neurodivergence. Okay, so first, what they really say, and I think is really unfair for opposition to say, is that in our side of the house, people aren't diagnosing at all. I think we've shown how the clinker effect of the rise in diagnosis and in mental health issues and in mental health acceptance has been totally different. So what I'm saying is, there aren't things correlated. The rise in self-diagnosis isn't correlated to the rise in diagnosis, in acceptance of those kind of things. What they say to me to tell me that this is correlated is one basic argument that they say that the mechanism is that people who are self-diagnosed have incentives to talk with each other about their own symptoms and things like that. I rebut that by simply saying that, okay, if they talk, and many of them don't even have the specifics, many of them aren't even neurodivergent, I don't think that these talks are actually increasing awareness at all. What I think is that in our side of the house, the counterfactual is yes, we have more people that we have a rise in awareness in this because this is a global phenomenon and not actually related to self-diagnosis. And people are diagnosing more with doctors because when you can't self-diagnose, this isn't something common. The only option you have is whether you diagnose with doctors, whether you don't diagnose. This is what should be talked about. Second, what they say about self-diagnosis being accurately. I don't think that self-diagnosis is that accurate as you think. I think we've shown in the Prime Minister 2 main reasons why self-diagnosis tends to be something that isn't always accurate. The first one is why there are a lot of relatable symptoms. So things that people with neurodivergence have, we also have in our daily lives, just not to that extent. If people many times they have difficulties in paying attention, we also have. We just deal with that because this isn't a genetic divergence on ours. It's just something that happens. We believe that many symptoms are related. If many people have, you tend to think that this is much more normal, and that's why you have incentives to think you have. But more than that, we have a second incentive. This incentive is based on you wanting to go away from those problems that you have. And this is an incentive to prevent you being lazy. Is that people that aren't okay with themselves, they understand they have problems and they are bad for that. When they do so, they think that they have an easy scapegoat. And scapegoat for my laziness, not the scapegoat for your laziness only. The scapegoat of your own problems that you have to go through them. We believe that the counterfactual in ourselves in the house is that if I am not that great in math, if I have problems paying attention, but I don't have any of this neurodivergence, and someone actually diagnosed me by not having any of that, I will try to deal with that. I will try to get better and to deal with these problems. In their side of the house, they just say and self-diagnose. Third, their better case and great demand. I have 3 responses for that. The first one is that greater demand not actually lead to better service. Why do I think so? I think so because this greater demand only leads to more offer if this is really diagnosed. What do I mean by that? When you want medicines for this kind of stuff, when you want treatment, when you want people that are actually willing to give you special treatment for you to get it in a way that's better for yourself, you need to be legally diagnosed. And this is specifics. In their side of the house, they can only get this better treatment if they are legally diagnosed. So the self-diagnosis don't solve anything. We already have that on our side of the house. We're actually showing how self-diagnosing actually leads to less legal diagnosing. But second, I believe that in their side of the house, there is an incentive for people who don't actually have, that are inaccurately self-diagnosing themselves, to look for this kind of treatment and for looking for this kind of stuff. And I think that this leads to 2 main factors. First, on resources such as medicines for this kind of people, vans, for example. Those people are actually using the offer of resources that those people that actually needed would use. So this will lead to less offer and scarcity for those people who need it. But second, when you're talking about specific things such as accommodations, such as special tutors and things like that, I believe that in their side of the house where everyone needs it, we simply don't have resources to fit everyone. In our side of the house where we have less people who actually have this neurodivergence, but we are actually accurate, we can deal with their own accommodations in the best way possible by giving all those resources for those people. So what I believe is the actual response and our claim in this side. Our claim is that in their side of the house, they actually get resources from those who need it and give for those who don't need it. I don't think there is this much change of increasing resources in their side of the house, and this is specific to legally diagnosed, which also have in our side of the house. Dealing with that, I don't think that this is this much change of perception that to actually better their side of the house. I actually think that the stigmatization and the normalization in their side of the house is a prejudice rather than a benefit for those who are actually diagnosed. Having that said, I will accept your POI.
Yeah, so if it is true that these symptoms are actually something many people experience all the time with different levels of severity, why isn't it better that we talk about these symptoms more and afford accommodations to everyone who experiences these symptoms?
I think that if everyone has different symptoms and different levels, the accommodation should be for those who are extreme and actually are diagnosed with that. If I think that I have a difficult and I don't actually have divergence on anything like that, I should just overcome this difficulty myself and not have a special accommodation because others might as well have this difficulty and they are not different from me. Okay, having that said, what I'm going is through a separate argument is showing that self-diagnosis harness everyone involved and have 2 main stakeholders. Those who actually falsely self-diagnose themselves, that are these people that may have difficulties but aren't in that extreme levels. I think that they have 2 scenarios. First, the scenario is that they self-diagnose themselves and actually look for treatment. When they look for treatment by self-diagnosing themselves, we have one scenario that is they get treatment that are based on medicine and this leads to collateral effects. So this is bad for their organism, this prejudices them and leads to problems. I believe this isn't a great scenario at all because those people are dealing with resources that aren't for them. And the second, they actually get resources that should go to people that actually need and actually deserve it. So in their side of the house is engaged directly with their argument that they have more resources for people who need, and in our side of the house, we're seeing that the resources are taken for this kind of people. And second, the second stakeholder are actually the people that need it and that self-diagnoses accurately. I believe that there are two scenarios. First, people that self-diagnoses and never get treatment at all. I believe that when people self-diagnose and not legally diagnosed and get actually see a doctor and hear his recommendations, I believe that they have less incentive to actually look for treatment and look for their accommodations. So they are probably accepting the accommodations to 1 hour of extra test at school, but they aren't getting their treatment that they deserve, their medicines, and even more, they don't get any special treatment for what they deserve. They just get the regular treatment that everyone is receiving. And second, those people that actually look for treatment, I believe in their side of the house, these people are still worse because they don't have the certainty that they have that, and they don't get as many resources as they would in our side of the house. So what I believe is that for everyone involved, this leads to something bad. And even if you say, okay, but I don't think that those who have self-diagnosis and are in those middle of health accurately, they are getting treatment or something like that. I believe that everyone involved gets problems with that. Even those that are saying that don't have self-diagnosis wrong, don't have any neurodivergence, and don't take any treatment, it is still bad for them because this serves as a scapegoat and they never actually deal with their own difficulties in their side of the house. They keep using accommodations that they don't need and they don't evolve, they don't get better, and they don't try to actually deal with their own problems. I believe that in their side of the house, everyone is prejudiced. So panel, what is actually our stance in this debate and why we're actually winning? I believe that in this stigma, we showed to you that denormalization isn't actually good. It leads to worse treatment, it leads to less resources, and more than that, it banalizes who actually needs and who actually needs in greatness. But second, I believe that we showed pragmatically how these people are better in our side of the house. How these people don't get treatment that they don't need, how these people actually deal with their own problems and try to look away and evolve with that. And second, how in our side of the house people are better at getting diagnosed by and by doing so, how they are more incentivized to do so. And third, how these people that actually get treatment have more resources on our side of the house. For all those reasons, I'm really proud in proposing.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their fine remarks, and now I invite the second opposition to conclude the debate for the speaker here.
Good to go? Awesome. Thanks. Okay. A self-diagnosing individual would laugh at Proposition's characterization of them. That they fail a test, see an ADHD TikTok and Instagram, and then truly believe that they have ADHD now. And this leads me to the two clarifications I want to make at the top of my speech. One, what is the quality of self-diagnosing treatments? How do individuals interact with this? And secondly, are resources equal or different on both sides of the house? I don't want to argue that self-diagnosing is a replacement of medical procedures, but I would like to argue that they are much higher quality and people are much more rational than the Proposition has tried to portray them as. And the first reason is that the people who do these narratives, who produce the TikToks, who produce the catalogs of telling you how to rate yourself on whether or not you're ADHD, get their popularity from their credibility they have. So this is why when you go on YouTube, those of the biggest channels are people who have actually experienced these conditions themselves, who have diagnosis of them, but two, they're also professionals, like the Psycho YouTube channel, and actual doctors who have YouTube channels that promote this and how to diagnose yourself. So the area that this is coming from is a higher quality than Proposition claims. But two, there's also feedback mechanisms on these people that over time, if they continue to produce very bad media on what it means to be ADHD, they will be called out from the very community that watches and consumes their content. So those are all the mechanisms of why likely these diagnoses, yes, won't be perfect, but they will be of a decent level to give individuals a somewhat perspective on what they have. But secondly, individuals are rational, and the self-diagnosis aren't concrete. They change over time. You don't just decide you have ADHD today and call it a day. If you think that maybe you have some symptoms, you will analyze this to your day-to-day life. So maybe today you think you have it, but you check yourself. Next week when you fail another test, you're considering, are these symptoms actually causing it? Am I reasonable? Are the things I'm watching actively reinforcing it? So over time, you will come to a somewhat reasonable conclusion. This means that there are not people that are totally taking away the legitimacy of these conditions, because there are incentives and there are reasonable, rational people when they claim that they have these conditions. The second thing I want to clear up then is on resources. They just assert back that resources will be equal and these things have rose together. But I would say that self-diagnosing has led to more resources going into this community. And this is for a variety of reasons. The first is that there's just more people that have attention, are interested in it when they're watching these reels more, when they're consuming the media, when they're asking governments to put more resources into diagnosing tools. But two, specific diagnosing tools get better over time. When individuals genuinely question whether or not they have ADHD, when there's a demand for that, that's when there is more diversity and specificity and nuance in the tools being made. But three, you just bring voices to those in the community that have the best opinions on it. If I'm interested in ADHD, I want to hear from someone who's a doctor or someone who is actually diagnosed on the issue. So more and more attention gets in. You don't just get a bunch of random ideas. You get ideas from the best people, which gives the best perception and education on those issues. That's why more resources come in, but also why self-diagnosing is not as bad as they claim. With those clarifications made then, I want to ask two questions before giving a third argument. One, on people who have less severe issues, how do we help them? And secondly, on people who do have severe issues on these conditions, are we able to better suit their needs? Firstly, on people that are less severe. These are people that likely don't need medication, who maybe probably wouldn't have waited 2 years to see a doctor to confirm if they had that. How do we help these people? Firstly, we said on accessibility. That oftentimes tools that help people with these conditions and also help people even if they had lower levels of these conditions, that information was beneficial, that having tools, for example, just having slightly troubles focusing in class and being able to put on headphones to focus more, having areas that were quiet, people that were accommodating, helped all individuals, and that was a benefit on our side of the house. What did they say under this? They said that you would get false diagnoses that would harm individuals because this is an excuse for them not to work on themselves. Firstly, I think just having a diagnosis is not where you end the discussion. Obviously, once you have a diagnosis, you still want to be able to solve and find solutions for your plan. Not at this time. So if I think I am dyslexic and I am having trouble reading in class, and maybe I try what is recommended by doctors but it doesn't work, I probably will figure out I don't have dyslexia or will look for other measures to fix it. So a diagnosis is not me giving up, it is me looking to find solutions. If their characterization is true, then people just don't figure out they have a diagnosis and give up on their side of the house and sit in self-blame. On our side of the house, at least people look for these solutions and are likely to find things that work. But two, as we explained, there's a spectrum of conditions that people have. That maybe I don't have an extreme range of autism or ADHD, but even if I have slight issues, things can still help me. For example, being able to focus better in class when I have less distractions, being able to put noise-canceling headphones on, being in an environment that accommodates my needs more can still help me, even if I'm not on the most extreme sides of these. All they had to say on this was on accessibility, but we proved that these resources help them for all those reasons, not at this time. What is the weighing of this theme then? I think that overdiagnosing is less harmful than underdiagnosing. And this is because even if you don't have ADHD, you can still benefit somewhat or not be harmed much by using the methods that they use. If you are watching a video on how to focus in class better, or to be able to focus in your life more, or if you have dyslexia and have a hard time reading and figure out methods to improve your reading, at the very least, even if you don't have these conditions, it doesn't harm you much. But the harm of not understanding your issues, not coming to terms with them, is a major harm to these people's lives. When someone with dyslexia just thinks they're bad at reading and dumb in the classroom and never actively comes to that realization, that is a harm that continues on their side of the house. But secondly, there is a long-term and short-term weighing here. On their side of the house, if you have a false diagnosis, probably you will go away with it eventually when you realize you actively you don't have ADHD. But it's under our side of the house where people that actually have these issues have to live their entire lives with them. That is why people with less severe issues are better catered to under our side of the house. Second question then, for people who do have higher conditions, who have more severities and more needs, why are we able to help these people under our side of the house? I firstly want to deal with what they said. They said that people with serious conditions will get less attention and less resources because people delegitimize it and there's less resources available. But I think this is firstly not true, because people who understand these conditions understand that there's a spectrum of areas. That someone who takes an ADHD test and scores a 5 out of 10 on it realizes that there's higher levels to it than themselves. And if you are listening to these TikToks and watching professionals talking about it, you probably understand different individuals need different things. That doesn't mean you just advocate for someone not having more things than what you need. That makes absolutely no sense. But secondly, on level of symptoms, there is no analysis on their side of the house why the money would simply go away or why you wouldn't be able to fund resources in these treatments that they want. I'll explain later why we're still able to get that. What did we get on our side of the house? This is a few things. One, people on our side of the house feel much less stigma around their issues when they're able to react to it. So we said many times it was the point of people going to that doctor in the very first place, realizing that it was fine to talk to friends about it, and that was why people were much able to do it on our side of the house. What is the weight of this claim then? There's two reasons why we can beat them out on the severity of the issue. The first is on the types of resources. And I want to note very carefully where the amount of resources change. If they want to talk about medical prescriptions, these are probably not going to lower in their side of the house. There is a reason why that these people will still be able to access this if they have diagnosis. But more importantly, doctors and the healthcare community are still understanding the people's issues. They will provide and give this to individuals. What is the delta in this debate is resources that are not those medical prescriptions. They're environments, they're classrooms, they're the resources people provide to individuals on a daily basis. And I would say people on the severe end of the spectrum and on the lower side of the spectrum still have the same needs under this. That if you are mild dyslexia or you have large dyslexia, what you really want is just flexibility in the classroom. If you have mild ADHD and severe ADHD, what you really want is just more ability to focus and having people cater to you. So those needs are still met in our side of the house, even when people with less severe conditions advocate that benefits all people under this. But two, there is a large section of people under our side of the house that we prove that never get to the stage of professional help under their side. Because one, they're scared to accept it in the very first place. It's a very big leap to go to a doctor and realize that you want to seek out professional help. So under our side of the house, we would say self-diagnosis is a stepping stone to get there in the very first place. That you start questioning, that you take a test online. And now that stigma is reduced under our side because lots of people in society think they have a minor version. When your friends are talking about it, when your family members think that it's something that is okay to have, that is when finally these people can get help under our side of the house. This is very crucial because someone who never understands that they have dyslexia but thinks they can't read, that thinks they have a problem with their intelligence, never gets help under their side of the house. It is only under our side that even if we overdiagnose, at least we help those that would never get the help that they needed under Proposition. For all these reasons, extremely proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their fine remarks, and I invite the third proposition to close out the constructive or debate from their side. Here, here. Wait. I do not think you can do that, but you're saying to me. I can add. I'll just ask.
You can change.
Yeah, I think understanding give them that in the
Give me like 2
WSDC.
seconds, I will ask.
Sure, take your time.
I was told you cannot do that.
Okay, something like that.
Can I start? So, may I pronounce right him or start my speech in the next word, please? Opinion. What side the position tries to paint for you? That in their side of the house, when everyone can self-diagnose and tell that they have a neurodivergence, they have a problem that everyone may actually get accommodations and actually solve all the problems of the role because they might have actually a problem to deal with these problems that they have in the role. What we believe in their side of the house, that there are a reason why exactly neurodivergences, they have actually accommodations because they actually have special needs. They have differences and they need to be treated differently. So it isn't a role where that we want that everyone can actually get these accommodations because they lose all the purpose of actually giving to these people the special needs that we have. So what I'm doing this speech, I talk about 3 things. First, how diagnoses work on both sides of the house. Second, talk about the stigmatization of in this debate. And third, talking about actually how to treat people that actually think that they have diagnosis but that they have the neurodivergence but actually they don't have. First, they try to paint that in this debate in a role where basically they are defending the rise of awareness throughout neurodivergences, but not necessarily the rise of self-diagnosis. They try to paint for you that only in their side of the house, people are discussing more about their neurodivergence, people are talking more about that, and people are integrating them in society. That's not true. They try to paint a world where only professional diagnosis and self-diagnosis, they happen in the same way. So we don't have any kind of differences. If you have more self-diagnosis, you actually going more to the professional diagnosis. That's not what happens. We have a trade-off on that. Because it's much easier to someone to actually self-diagnose them if they watch a video in the social media that's telling that if they don't have enough focus in a classroom, they probably have some kind of disease that will actually need them to give accommodation or special needs. So they don't need to go to a professional to actually say that to them. So because they are actually believing that this is something that would benefit their life and actually improve the way that they are living. So they don't have the necessity to go, for example, to a professional to actually diagnose them and tell them the special needs that they have, they think that they need to have. So I believe that in a world where you can have accommodations and you can have a special treatment, if you don't go to the doctor and you're actually saying to people that you have something, we believe that it's much easier to do that. So people are actually doing that and self-diagnosing them instead of going to the doctor. And this is very bad. Why? Because we believe that these people, they actually have special needs when they are actually diagnosed. And we believe that in a world where these people, they have equal treatment, even if they don't have official diagnosis, you're actually causing a problem with the people that has the problem. Not now. So talking about the what they paint about the doctors, how actually these things, the people that are in social media, how they actually can receive this kind of diagnosis. They talking about the credibility, how this is the way that they are actually gaining these followers. We don't believe this is true. Two reasons for that. First, we believe that the way that doctors actually act in social media shouldn't be actually talking about, oh, if you have this kind of symptom, you probably have this kind of neurodivergence, so you need to have this accommodation, because every kind of neurodivergence isn't what they try to paint as a set of different symptoms that you may present to the society, but actually a way that you can perceive the reality differently. So we believe that neurodivergence can only be diagnosed if you have being tracked by a doctor for a long period of time, talking about your experiences, doing different kinds of tests, doing different kinds of exams. What can only happen in a role where a professional do that, not by actually going to social media and discovering every kind of disease of symptom that you have through some kind of neurodivergence and actually saying that you have that. We don't believe that official good doctors, and people that have official credibility, they would do this kind of thing, because this is not the way that neurodivergences should be diagnosed. And second, we believe that to go viral on TikTok or Instagram, you don't need to be a good doctor to have a lot of followers. You just need to capture the attention of the people that are in the social media. So if you are someone that actually tracking the attention of the people and saying big things that may relate with them, these people are going to follow you. So you are actually going to social media and saying that you are a doctor, and you are actually going to tell people that, oh, if you have a problem in the classroom and you can't focus, you should have accommodations. People will love that because they actually have problems of focus in classes. So what would happen? These kind of people are going to go viral. They would have followers. They would actually have credibility in the social media. So people are self-diagnosing them without having this kind of disease. So I believe that the way that the people are perceiving this kind of medicine is actually banalizing them, not going to the doctor and not have professional diagnosis of that. What would happen? People that actually need this kind of tracking and actually need this kind of accommodations, they are banalized in society. And then we enter in the main question of this debate about stigmatization. They don't paint for you what stigmatization is. What they try to say, oh, if you have more people talking about neurodivergences, if you have more people living with you, if this is more common in society, you have less stigmatization. That's not actually how it works. Stigmatization for someone that has neurodivergence is not integrating them in the society as everyone should be integrated. But stigmatizing them is not legitimizing their necessities and saying that they don't have enough problems, that they need to be treated differently, and thinking that they're normal in society. That's stigmatizing someone that has a neurodivergence. That what would happen with that in society? People that don't perceive that they actually need special treatment because they are as common as everyone in society, they are not giving them enough accommodation that they need to be living well. So what we believe, in a world where everyone may be neurodivergent, we won't have accommodations for everyone, and we won't treat them differently as we need to treat them. Stigmatizing them is not treating them as everyone. Is not treating them as differently. stigmatizing is exactly treating them as everyone, because they aren't everyone. They have special needs, and these special needs need to be treated. These special needs need to be followed. And we believe that only in our side of the house, when people aren't getting this kind of self-diagnosis and actually going to professionals to discover that, they might have that. What they try to paint what that would happen in their side of the house. That even if you have this problem, that people that don't have this neurodivergence being diagnosed, what would happen is everyone's getting accommodations, everyone's getting like benefits in society, and it's better over-diagnosing than sub-diagnosing. We don't believe that this is true. Why? Because there is a reason why there are accommodations. Because people have special needs. And we believe that it's totally unfair to treat them as everyone needs to be treated. So I believe that if I get in my school and say that I need accommodations because I have ADHD, I shouldn't be treated as someone that actually has ADHD, because it would be immoral. You're actually giving the same benefits to someone that don't have the same necessities. So in their role, we're actually not treating these people with the special needs that they need to have. We don't believe that you are treating these people in the society as they need to be treated. Before I continue to the last part of this debate, that's the comparison of the worst.
So a person who self-diagnoses for ADHD probably wants to access to medicine and medication to help them focus. So why isn't self-diagnosis a stepping stone to get an actual diagnosis in the long term?
Yes, because we believe that it's totally easy to get these kind of things in a role where you self-diagnose. We believe that a lot of people can access that in the role, because actually what you are telling is that in a role where this is normalized, you can have this kind of recommendation or this kind of access. We believe that it would actually happen, so we don't have actually a professional diagnosis to make able to people to actually have access to these kind of recommendations. We believe that this is bad, because this is the way our people are, for example, forging medicine, they are forging diplomas in medicine, so people are not actually giving them enough special treatment to the people that actually need this kind of accommodations. So I believe that only in a role where we treat them as differently and you actually perceive that they need special treatment and you're treating them as different in society, you're actually giving them the benefits that they need to live in society. They try to paint this role as only their side of the house we are discussing, but we firmly believe that in both sides of the house, people are very aware of the problems of neurodivergence, people are very aware of the problem of mental health that is growing in society, but only in their side of the house, people are banalizing these kind of things because they are treating them as common in society. Talking about these things is different from making them common in society. In our side of the house, we are talking about them, but understanding that they need special treatment and actually giving them to these people.
Thank that speaker for their fine remarks, and I invite the opposition speaker to open or close the constructive portion of the debate and open the off-wall period.
Good to go. So clearly, clearly there are two groups of people that we're talking about here. Number one, that there are people with severe cases of these mental conditions that are fairly obvious they have these conditions. And number two, which is the vast majority of other people, which they agree experience symptoms of mental conditions through varying levels. How are we able to benefit both of these groups of people? I'll talk about, first, let's start with people with these severe cases of these conditions. What do we say on our side? We say that these people, far more of these people, will face less stigma and more awareness, which leads to more cases of diagnoses. Why is this true? So they try to refute this by saying that the rise of awareness is not correlated with the rise of self-diagnosis. They give zero mechanization of this, they assert this. We explain to you why the increased rate of self-diagnoses, even if it's not the only reason why awareness have increased, it is a substantial reason why awareness have increased. So things like people becoming self-diagnosing and then being incentivized to research more into these mental conditions, people are more likely to communicate with each other. But secondly, the second layer of this, which they never once refuted, is that it is not only just awareness that has increased, but destigmatization, which means that we think historically there's been a strong stigma against being considered as having certain mental conditions that you don't want to be viewed as abnormal from everyone else. You don't want to be viewed as non-typical. But we think that the rise of more people self-identifying with these illnesses have created less of a stigma, which means that people with real mental conditions are far more likely to come out and say that they have these conditions and actually seek diagnoses. Their response to this was that, but people no longer need to be diagnosed if they can self-diagnose. This is obviously untrue. They said themselves that there are certain treatments, like prescribed medication, like therapy treatments in hospitals, like admission to special ed programs, etc. All of these things requires a professional diagnosis from a doctor. So if it is the case that these people have severe mental conditions and they need these things, we think that they're likely to actually seek out more diagnoses. We're the side that actually removes the barriers of significant stigma for them to actually seek these diagnoses. They also said that you're likely to take resources away from these people with severe conditions. This is once again not true. We explained to you that oftentimes this is not zero-sum, and the increased demand and the increased awareness of these sort of mental conditions and more people demanding that places like schools and workplace have more accommodations with people with human conditions have led to these environments being more accommodating, more funding directed towards helping people with mental conditions. So this is not a zero-sum game. And once again, they themselves said that there are certain treatments that require professional diagnoses, and there are obviously like schools or like workplaces are obviously able to discern people with professional diagnoses than people without professional diagnoses. So people who actually have severe cases are obviously still going to be afforded the help that they get. So the impact of this point is we think that there's a very marginal difference in whether or not these people get help. Most times people with severe conditions still get more degree of help, but there is a difference between removing the stigma for these people to come out and say that they have these mental illnesses to actually try to get diagnoses. So we win. So given that this is most of what they spend their case on, trying to win on people with severe mental conditions not getting help, if we can prove to you that the far more important problem is whether or not these people get diagnosed in the first place, and we explain more people get diagnosed on our side, we're able to beat them on their own ground. This is independently round winning for us. I'll take a moment.
Even if people that self-diagnose them go to professionals after and realize that they aren't actually neurodivergent, they are still creating this image that they are a banalization in society, that everyone may be neurodivergent. The image is still being passed.
Sorry, I actually didn't really understand. So if someone goes to a doctor and are not diagnosed, then they're not diagnosed, and then they wouldn't get medication or whatever. If they still think they have some sort of symptoms, then that's fine. We think that they can still access some amount of accommodation. The whole point is that there is a wide spectrum of how severe do people experience these symptoms, and then therefore relating to how severe their symptom is, how much accommodation they get. We think everyone should just get their preferred level of accommodation. Okay, so let's then talk about the people who are in the middle, who experience some level of symptom but perhaps don't reach the threshold of being professionally diagnosed with their mental condition. Why do we think these people matter? And the first thing to suggest is that Proposition takes on a very one-dimensional view of these people. Note the language they're using, that they say that these people who are not neurotypical, that they're just lazy people who experience some difficulties and therefore want to use mental conditions as an excuse. We reject this premise. We think that there are many real instances of people who experience these symptoms, who, even if they're not the most severe degrees, still faces difficulties in life and still deserve to be accommodated. In fact, the whole development of the idea of there being an autism spectrum arise because of people coming out saying that they have varying degrees of autism, varying degrees of symptoms that previously weren't being diagnosed. The whole areas of academia now recognizing mental illness as a spectrum arise because of people who are able to isolate individual cases of these symptoms and express themselves. So why do we think we help these people? Number one is that we think these people do now get the accommodation they need. That even if it's not like professional diagnoses or medication, this means that teachers are more likely to give them accommodation, like having deadlines, deadline or more flexibility in the classroom, installing things like exercise bikes in the classroom to help ADHD kids take away their excess energy. All of these are real forms of accommodation that we think are able to be afforded to these types of people. Secondly, we also think that these people just feel better at themselves and are able to accept themselves as people who have mental conditions and who face real difficulties. We think on their side, the counterfactual is that these people just suck it up, and if they experience these difficulties, just believe that they are somehow unable to perform as good as well as other people because they're simply inferior to other people. We think the ability to feel better and feel accepted in themselves are also important things to afford these people. Their only content here is people are lazy and therefore unwilling to change themselves. We think this is a wildly unrealistic characterization of how most people act, right? Like there are strong incentives for people to try to do well in school. There are strong incentives for people to try to do well in life, to get better, to do better at work. It is unrealistic to say that most people are just flat out lazy and are unwilling to change themselves. In fact, we think that a better awareness of them having these difficulties and them seeking these accommodations will help them achieve better in life. If it is really true that some people are so lazy that they're willing to use any excuse to not improve themselves, okay, maybe these people will probably just find a different excuse anyways. So then, how do we outside of these people themselves seeking more accommodation, on a societal level, how do we also help these people? We think that if there's a larger amount of people that self-diagnose and express these concerns and express the fact that they have these symptoms, we think that you create a society that is generally far more willing to be accommodating. We generally, like for example, the rise of like building workplaces to be more like open floor plans to help more people adjust to different environments of working. For example, schools and workplaces having more flexibility in terms of deadlines. All of these things developed because we've created a society where more people are willing to talk about their symptoms, more people are willing to say that they have experienced difficulties, and therefore we've created environments that are far more accommodating to these people. We were able to create an environment to help everyone succeed because we recognize that everyone have varying degrees of difficulties. Both these things we're very proud of those.
I'd like to thank that speaker for their kind remarks and invite the opposition to reply to close up the debate for their side. Through you.
Okay. There are two ways for opposition to win this round. The first is to prove that we have better access to better kinds of care. The second is on destigmatization. Fortunately, I think that we've proven both of these impacts. Firstly then, on access to care. What I want to note here is that the proposition case hinges on the assumption that diagnoses are likely to be broadly inaccurate. This is how they make their incredibly cynical claim that people are going to abuse neurodivergence to justify their laziness. This is how they make their second claim that neurotypical people will take away resources from people who are actually neurodivergent. But from the outset, we gave you many reasons as to why self-diagnoses were likely to be broadly correct. The first was that there is likely to be sufficient information available, that there are a lot of reputable sources like actual doctors who will go online and give their input as to what symptoms can look like. That secondly, you are likely to be rational. You're going to do research if you actually think that you identify as neurodivergent, that you're going to do your due diligence and get all the information that you need. If you buy that a lot of self-diagnoses are likely to be accurate, it is very hard for proposition to automatically win because all of their claims are out of the round. Whereas on our side of the house, we've managed to prove that people who need help are more likely to get help on our side. That you have more people going to the psychiatrist in the first place that give themselves space and time to adjust to whatever kinds of neurodivergence that they may have. We think that having more accommodations on our side of the house is the biggest impact of the round, and that's what we're able to win on. But let's say that self-diagnoses can be flawed in a lot of cases. We told you that even in those circumstances, there were a number of positives in terms of access to care. The first is that a lot of people who are neurotypical can also benefit off of self-diagnoses. That even if you don't meet the distinct bar for ADHD, some people who do have mild attention issues can still benefit off of learning things like management techniques that people who have ADHD like to use. The second impact was that you get an increase in services, that you have more demand for clinics and drugs and things like that. They only responded to this second impact, that you get more services, whereas they say that these services are limited and therefore you take them away from people who need them the most. But we challenge this idea of limited resources down the bench. So for example, in a school, we think that there can be more demand for counselors, and in many cases you have more counselors being hired. When you have more demand for ADHD drugs, that creates more of a market for drug companies to do so. And the implication that we've given you down the bench is that even if self-diagnoses are inaccurate, there can still be massive benefits to improvements to care, and that's what we're able to win on as well. But let's say you don't buy that we get improvements to care. Why do we win on destigmatization? Again, even if self-diagnoses are incorrect, we think there is a greater normalization of neurodivergence that exists independent of that. We think that proposition in this theme relied on an unproven assertion that people are just able to get diagnosed on their side suddenly. But our claim was that people don't go to the doctor in the very first place on their side. If their symptoms don't align with the traditional stereotypical symptoms of ADHD, they're not going to think that they perhaps have that even if they do suffer from it severely. Where there perhaps may be familial stigma that is incredibly strong on their side of the house that will prevent you from seeking treatment. Clearly, if proposition cared about people with the most severe neurodivergence on their side, those people are more likely to reach out to doctors on our side in the very first place, and therefore are more likely to get treated on our side regardless of limited resources. But the push they spend the most time on is actually like the weirdest one, right? That like destigmatization is not good. But I think that here, proposition is grossly misinterpreting what destigmatization actually means. Because their claim is that like this will lead to everyone being treated the same, that like no one gets accommodation. But clearly we explain that the opposite is true. That if it's okay to have ADHD, then clearly it's okay to have accommodations as well. That if you have autism, you might need more time for tests. That is what we are normalizing rather than treating everyone the same. Clearly that was a misinterpretation of our claim. The conclusion here then is that we are likely to get destigmatization, which they challenge very poorly, and that destigmatization was likely to be a net good for society. We think this is a round-winning impact, given that you erase a lot of the shame and negativity associated with neurodivergence, and you increase the likelihood of seeking help. For all those reasons and more, very proud to win on law.
And invite the proposition reply to the debate as a whole. Here.
Okay, if everyone can hear me and everyone's ready, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel stance is clear. Diagnoses are great. You should get them to the doctor at the first place. What they say is that people aren't certain enough to go to the doctor because they aren't certain of their symptoms and things on that side of the house. What they believe and what they think that happens in our side of the house. We believe that we still have the same mechanisms that was brought in framing by our Prime Minister on how people are more willing to accept these kind of things and be aware of these kind of things. What I think is the difference in here? What she said is that you aren't certain, and that's the only mechanism that you have for not going to the doctor. If you aren't certain and you don't have enough incentives to go to the doctor, why would you self-diagnose yourself in the first place? This doesn't make sense. What we're saying is that on our side of the house, we have every other incentive to, if you think you have something, you do. We just regret to self-diagnose yourself. We think you should go to the doctor, and that's much better. Having that said, what we believe that there's a trade-off. If you already self-diagnose yourself, you have no incentives to go to the doctor. If you already get your accommodations you need, and if it's like that, you have no incentive to do so. The second scenario is if it's just a stepping stone. If it's just a stepping stone for you to go and diagnose yourself in the doctor, then you aren't self-diagnosing yourself. You have a thought and you're not still diagnosed. This thought is just confirmed the moment you diagnose. So this isn't your scenario and actually ours, where you have a thought but you still diagnose yourself in the doctor. Having that said, I will go to the 2 classes in this debate, and you have to do. Our counterfactual is diagnosing by a doctor. Yours isn't. First, on care. I believe that this is one of the most important classes in the debate, and this goes to proposition. Why that? I think we've shown a lot on how care is just important the moment that 1, it's specific for your needs, and 2, it's done by a professional doctor and actually treatments that actually work for you. We had 2 kind of scenarios. First, people who get care in each side of the house. We believe that people are most incentivized to get care in our side of the house if you consider that people that actually need it. Why that? Because we believe and we showed to you that when they go to a professional doctor, they get diagnosed, the doctor will send them to where they need and get them their needs. In their side of the house, these people might not even go to the doctor because they self-diagnose themselves. They are going to internet and not very accurate information. Why it isn't accurate? I think Victor explained how these people have different symptoms overall and different treatments are needed for different neurodivergence. Having that said, I have another scenario. A scenario of people that actually get the treatment. I believe that in our side of the house, the care is better because the care is more unique and focused on your specificity. Why that? We believe that there is a whole clash in here on how things are and how resources are made. What they say in the side of the house is that the increasing demand for resources actually lead to more resources and more accommodation. What we say is that those resources are unique and they are scarce and they can only be used by someone. So if you need an extra hour for taking a test for everyone and everyone has this extra hour, then no one gets this extra hour. And the people that actually need it aren't getting the benefit for that. But more than that, I believe that there are benefits that are actually scarce, such as medicine, such as, for example, special tutors. If everyone needs an individual special tutor, then the school doesn't have enough for everyone. You're taking the resources for those who actually don't need it. And why we are believing that this is this inaccuracy? What they say is that people have an incentive to be accurate and things like that. What we say, even if people are honest, they can't make mistakes. They aren't doctors themselves. You have to deal with the risk of inaccuracy outside of the house. But second, people have incentives to do so. They have social acceptance and they want to do so. They want to actually be a neurodivergence outside of the house. We explain that. If you want to be, why not be? That's your case. On our side, we actually go to a real doctor and do that. We do believe that if people actually need it, they go to a real doctor in our side of the house. Because if they suffer with that, they are going to a real doctor. Now, I already explained why we want to declare outside of the house. In stigmatization, what they say is important is that stigmatization will actually lead for more normalization and people will actually get the care they need and they will be treated better. We showed how people are treated better in our side of the house where we have all these incentives and framing on how people are actually accepting those things anymore. What is our response? Our response is clear. The moment that you stigmatize someone and treat everyone as neurodivergent, you aren't treating anyone special. You aren't catering their needs. In our side of the house, we cater their needs much better. In our side of the house, we don't normalize something that should be treated with extremely serious. If everyone can have ADHD, then there's no motive in treating it serious. It's just some joke and everyone can have it. In our side of the house, it's serious. You need a real diagnosis and a real doctor to do so. Thank you so much. Really talking to you.
Remarks and all speakers for a wonderful first round of coverage of WSDC. Please shake hands outside and we'll call you back.
Thank you.
Can we also stop the recording if possible?
Oh, yes.